Global inequities are certainly nothing new. Some argue, however, that inequities today are greater than ever before because of the worldwide process of cultural and economic integration, often referred to as globalization.
The word globalization refers to that integration, but it also refers in people's minds to a number of other things, the kinds of technologies that allow for greater long-distance communications and transportation. It also refers, at least in my mind, to a kind of political ideology about free markets and how investment should be free on a global scale and all this.
I think what the term evokes for people is the sense that there's no social protection anymore, that corporations are free to do whatever they want, to move their operations around the world without any restriction, without any protection for ordinary people.
The term used by some to describe the fundamental philosophy behind globalization is neoliberalism.
Neoliberalism is kind of the ideology of free markets, and the idea that the market should reign supreme and that governments should kind of butt out from economic activity. And this is an ideology that the United States is imposing on the poor countries of the world to say they have to open their markets. They have to open their markets to foreign capital. They have to open their markets to foreign firms who want to invest in them. And often that means it's associated with setting up governments that start cutting back on social services. In other words, they don't want money spent on social services. They want it to be spent all done through the market as much as possible.
The world is very much regulated by markets. Anything can be commodified. You can buy and sell anything, anywhere, at any time in the world, from toothpaste to cultural symbols to things that would cause great harm. And there's no stopping this process. Everything is defined in terms of markets. If people want it, there's going to be a supplier for it. And this could be the weapons of mass destruction, or it could simply be a silk scarf from China.
Well, globalization can benefit many groups, or it can benefit not many groups. The ones that the process most obviously benefits are business corporations and investors who are expanding around the world. But in recent years, it has been very imperfect, especially because it seems to leave out poorer countries of the world. Investment tends to avoid countries which are deemed to be unsafe and where there are few natural resources. And so there are large parts of the world that are left out of the process.
Ironically, it is globalization that some say has brought the nations of the world closer together. But this hasn't diminished the glaring inequities that continue to separate them. Perhaps nowhere is this duality more apparent than in what has been called the global care chain.
The more the rich nations get richer and the poor nations get poorer, which in the last 30 years they have, the more people in poor nations are seeking work in countries of the rich nations. So the first thing is migration has increased because of this. Second is that a higher proportion of migrants are women. And the third thing is those women are generally in their 20s and 30s, and a good portion of them have children. The overwhelming reason that they're here is to earn money and send it back to their families. It's not that they're being negligent of their familial duties, but it is leaving a population of young people and old people back in third world countries, while these women come and provide care to our young and our old.
So what you need for this institution to exist is people who have enough money to pay for the work and people who are poor enough to do the work. So the more equality there is, the less of this occupation you'll find, and the more inequality there is, the more of this occupation you'll find. In an unequal global situation, what you get is more and more women coming from particular countries such as the Philippines, Sri Lanka, Mexico, El Salvador, to the US in order to do this sort of work.
Some have described this wholesale migration of wives and mothers as the modern-day equivalent of 19th century imperialism.
In the 19th century, we saw imperialism with the following kind of face. We saw some white men from northern rich countries come down to Africa, take out ivory, take out gold, and extract it under forced labor conditions and take it back to their rich northern countries. And we called it imperialism. And it was under the ideology of a white man's burden. And we think of it as exploitative. Well, today, I think we have to ask ourselves, do we see something strangely parallel, except the players are not male, they're female. And the good extracted is not ivory and gold, it's love and care. And the prevailing ideology is not white man's burden, but free choice and free trade, and the neoliberal kind of ideology of freedom.
Not everyone agrees that there's a parallel with imperialism. Some argue that there's nothing wrong with a system that provides enhanced economic opportunities to women of poor countries looking to help their families.
You walk down the street of New York and there are Jamaican nannies walking very slowly with elderly patients. Now, how do we respond to this? I personally am all for paid care work, and I'm certainly not against migration. But if migrant care workers are caring for our elderly people and leaving theirs neglected, there seems to be here an issue that we need to think about. The ultimate solution is to address the problem of inequality between rich countries and poor countries. Most of the women who leave their small kids behind would like to be close to those small kids and take care of them if they had a choice. And we need to give them that choice. Either they ought to be able to bring their kids when they come, and we as a society ought to say, okay, we're responsible for those children too. Or we ought to say, it's not okay for rich countries to keep getting richer and poor countries keep getting poor, and then use the remittances of migrants as a way of privately on the side redistributing wealth.